The conference room at Vanguard Legacy Law fell silent after my brother Adam's declaration. 15 luxury apartment complexes in prime Scottsdale locations were the subject of the hour. Combined value, well over $500 million, specifically $585 million. It was an astronomical sum, enough to buy and sell our family name 10 times over. And according to Adam, they were all his. This is only fair, my mother, Kimberly, added, her hand resting heavily on Adam's shoulder. My Aunt Stephanie smirked from the corner, nodding in agreement. I sat there, the invisible daughter, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and absolute betrayal. I didn't cry, I didn't flinch. I just watched the balance of my life finally shift. Have you ever been the invisible one in your own family while someone else took all the credit? Leave a yes in the comments if you're quietly building your own empire. I'd love to hear your story. Adam leaned back in his leather chair, a king who hadn't yet realized his throne was made of matchsticks. Nothing to say, Grace? He asked, his voice thick with the arrogance of a man who thought he'd already won. No tantrum? No begging for a small piece of the pie? My mother, Kimberly, let out a soft, practiced sigh, her eyes fixed on my navy blue dress with the same disapproval she'd shown since I was 16 years old. Be a big girl, Grace, she whispered. Adam is the one with the head for business. You're just you, wasting your potential in a public service cubicle, clinging to a government pension while your brother builds a real legacy. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I didn't even look at her. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet. To them, it was just a tool for my boring analyst job at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They didn't know I spent my days decoding market trends and my nights auditing the very properties Adam claimed were his. For 5 years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family, footing the emotional bill while they overdrafted my compassion. But I was done being their cash cow. I logged into the master management portal for all 15 Scottsdale complexes. My fingers moved with clinical precision. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a balance sheet. I initiated a total remote lockout of the administrative servers. Every login credential Adam used to skim rent and falsify maintenance reports was being terminated in real time. I watched the status bars on my screen turn from a healthy green to a lethal, vibrant red. Adam's phone buzzed on the mahogany table. Then it buzzed again. He frowned, his thumb swiping frantically across the glass. What the hell? He muttered, his charismatic mask finally starting to slip. The system is down. It says, access denied. Fix it. This is a massive, multi-million-dollar empire, not your little government spreadsheet. I set the tablet down slowly. The silence in the room was no longer the heavy weight of their judgment. It was the quiet before a massive landslide. I looked at my father, Gary. He was 75 now, and he still looked at Adam with a blind pride that bordered on a religious cult. Dad, I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning in the desert. You really don't know, do you? He blinked, clearly confused by my lack of submission. Know what, Grace? Don't be dramatic. Just help your brother with the server. I leaned forward, my hands folded calmly on the table. I'm not helping him with anything. I'm firing him. Aunt Stephanie let out a sharp, mocking laugh from the corner. You're firing him? From what? You work in a cubicle, dear. You have no authority here. That's where you're wrong, I replied, my gaze never leaving my father's face. Authority comes from ownership. And since you clearly haven't looked at a single Maricopa County property record in the last 60 months, I think it's time we discuss who actually pays the taxes on those 15 complexes. Gary's face went completely white, and his hands began to tremble as he stared at the tablet in my hands. The game was over. I had spent 5 years preparing for this moment, and now the first strike had landed right between their eyes. As I look at their shocked faces, my mind drifts back to where it all began, to the heat of the Scottsdale silt and the smell of diesel fumes, which feel more real to me than the polished table I'm currently leaning against. While Adam was at Yale, failing his business courses and trading on our family name, I was on the ground. Grandpa John started taking me to construction sites when I was barely 21. He didn't want a business-minded heir who only knew how to sign checks. He wanted someone who understood the grit of property finance. He saw what my parents refused to acknowledge, that I had the tactical mind he possessed, while Adam only had the vanity of a man who thought money was an entitlement, not a craft. When Grandpa John's health began to decline, back in 2019, he called me into his study. He didn't just give me the deeds, he gave me a warning. He told me that Adam had already started stealing, pocketing cash from tenants, and reporting vacancies that didn't exist. Grandpa wanted to see how far his grandson would go before his conscience kicked in. It never did. So, we established the Caldwell Heritage Trust. It was a strategic necessity to protect my career as a senior analyst from any conflict of interest, but it also became my greatest shield. This leads to what many people don't understand about the invisible chains of a survivor. For 5 years, I sat at family dinners and listened to Adam brag about his real estate empire, while my mother sighed about my modest government salary. To my parents, my silence was proof that I had reached my ceiling. They didn't realize that, for a survivor, silence is a fortress. When you grow up in a family that treats your value like a floor mat, you learn that the only way to truly escape the prison is to let your captors believe you've accepted yourself. I wasn't just enduring their insults, I was using their low expectations as a smokescreen while I built a case that was legally and financially lethal. Every time I sent Adam a management fee, I was actually documenting his crimes. I watched him buy an $85,000 car and take luxury vacations all on my dime. Meanwhile, I lived in a modest apartment and drove a sensible sedan, funneling every cent of that rental income back into property optimization. I refinanced 3 complexes at lower rates, increasing our cash flow by thousands every month. I optimized the portfolio while Adam was busy performing the role of a successful man. I spent those 5 years tracking every single dollar he touched. My forensic audit was a $15,500,000 indictment, just waiting for the right moment to explode. I wasn't just his sister anymore. I was his boss, and eventually his prosecutor. Looking at his arrogant face now, I realize my grandfather was right. The best way to catch a thief is to let him believe he's already stolen the crown. Adam's charismatic facade didn't just slip, it shattered into jagged pieces of entitlement. "Give me that tablet, Grace!" he screamed, his voice hitting a pitch I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. "You have no right to touch family assets. Those accounts hold millions. You're tampering with a $195 million legacy." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I simply watched him sweat. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I was looking at a bug under a microscope, one that had finally realized it was pinned to the glass. My mother, Kimberly, rushed to his side, her hand fluttering near his arm as if to shield him from the truth of his own balance sheet. "Grace, stop this at once," she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and indignation. "Your brother has worked tirelessly for this family. To suggest he's a thief to claim Grandpa John gave everything to you, it's unthinkable. The poor man was 86 years old. He was confused. He didn't know what he was signing." This is the reality of what I call the trap of normalizing cruelty. For decades, my parents didn't just love Adam, they chose to believe his lies, because the truth would force them to admit they had failed as parents. They normalized his arrogance and dismissed my competence, because it was easier to maintain the illusion of the golden sun than to acknowledge they were subsidizing a criminal. When you spend your life excusing a child's character flaws, those flaws eventually become the very walls of your own prison. "He wasn't confused, Mom," I said, my words falling like heavy weights into the silence. "He was accurate. He gave me years to watch Adam manage these properties. He wanted to see if his grandson had a shred of integrity. But Adam didn't just skim the cream. He tried to take the whole bottle." My father, Gary, leaned forward, his face a map of deep-seated denial. "Even if that's true, Grace, we are family. We don't settle debts with server lockouts and public records. We sit down and we talk. You need to sign these papers now. We've already drafted a release. You renounce any claim to the Caldwell Heritage Trust, and we forget this ever happened." I looked at the document they slid across the table. It was a contract of self-erasure. "You want me to sign away $195 million because you're worried about Adam's reputation?" I asked. "We're worried about the family," Gary yelled. "Adam has provided for us. He's the reason your mother and I have that mansion in Scottsdale. He bought it for us as a thank you for our support. I felt a cold, sharp spike of satisfaction. This was the lie. Adam had been feeding them the grand gesture funded by my own bank account. Actually, Dad, that's the most interesting part of my audit, I said. Adam didn't buy that house. He simply told you he did. In reality, he forged a lease agreement and has been paying the mortgage out of the rental income from the very complexes I own. You aren't living in your son's gift. You're living in my property, and he's been charging my trust for your stay. The silence that followed was absolute. Adam's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Kimberly looked like she was about to faint. They were staring at the reality of their golden child, and for the first time in 32 years, the light was blinding. The door to the conference room opened with a soft, clinical click. Marcus, my lead attorney from Vanguard Legacy Law, stepped in, his expression as unreadable as a court transcript. Since February 2019, Grace has been the sole legal owner of all 15 complexes through Caldwell Legacy Holdings, LLC. These quitclaim deeds were signed, notarized, and recorded 5 years ago, shielded behind a corporate veil that Adam was too arrogant to ever pierce. For 60 months, every decision made regarding these assets has legally required her authorization. Have you ever been the invisible one in your own family? While someone else took all the credit? Leave a yes in the comments if you're quietly building your own empire. I'd love to hear your story. My brother Adam lunged for the folders, his hands clawing at the paper as if he could erase the ink with his fingernails. Grandpa was out of his mind, he shrieked. This won't hold up in court. I've been the one doing the work. I'm the one who maintained the legacy. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his voice. Actually, Adam, your work is the reason we're here. He pulled out the final document, the forensic audit that had been 5 years in the making. We've spent the last 6 months tracing your management of Grace's trust. We didn't just find rent skimming. We found an organized, systematic embezzlement scheme totaling $15,500,000. The number seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the room. My mother, Kimberly, let out a strangled sound, her eyes darting between her son and the lethal pages in front of her. $3,500,000? Gary whispered, his voice cracking. Adam, tell me this is a mistake. Tell me this is just another one of Grace's spreadsheets. But Adam couldn't speak. He was staring at a specific page in the report, the one detailing a company called Scottsdale Silt Maintenance. This is where it gets interesting, I said, leaning back as the room began to tilt. I noticed that maintenance costs across the complexes tripled in 2021. You told Dad it was inflation. In reality, you created 3 dummy LLCs to bill my trust for repairs that were never performed. Marcus pointed to a list of bank transfers. You weren't just stealing rent, Adam. You were laundering $15,500,000 through fake invoices and shell companies. In the state of Arizona, that's not just grand theft, that's felony money laundering. This was the lethal discovery. This wasn't just a family fight over a dead man's money anymore. It was a criminal prosecution. I hadn't spent 5 years being the quiet daughter out of weakness. I had spent 5 years building a cage that was now, finally, closing around him. The air in the room was thick with the scent of ozone, and the sudden, freezing realization that the golden child wasn't just a disappointment. He was a federal criminal, and the daughter they had discarded was the only one holding the key to his cell. Adam's knees hit the carpeted floor with a dull thud. The sound was the most honest thing he'd produced in 32 years. Grace, please, he whimpered, his hands reaching out to grab the edge of my blazer as if he were a drowning man and I were the only life raft in the desert. We're family. Think about Mom. Think about Dad's heart. If you file this, I'm gone. My life is over. I stepped back, avoiding his touch as if it were a physical stain. Anger wasn't the right word for what I felt. It was closer to the satisfaction of a math problem finally resolving itself. I looked down at the man who had spent his life calling me a useless clerk while he used my secret labor to buy $5,000 suits. Your life was over the second you decided that $15,500,000 was worth more than your character, Adam, I said, my voice clinical and flat. My mother, Kimberly, was sobbing, now a high-pitched sound of a woman realizing her entire safety net was an elaborate lie. Gary, she gasped, clutching my father's arm. Do something! She's your daughter. Tell her to stop this madness. My father, Gary, didn't speak. He looked at the forensic report, then at the son he'd worshipped, and finally at me. For the first time in my life, he saw me not as a disappointment to be managed, but as the only person in the room with the power to decide their fate. Grace, he whispered, his voice sounding every bit of his 75 years. Where are we supposed to go? The Scottsdale mansion? You said it's yours? I pulled a set of keys from my pocket and set them on the mahogany table, not the keys to their home. The Scottsdale property was never yours to inherit because every mortgage payment was made with money laundered from my trust, I explained. I've already sold it to a developer. You have 48 hours to vacate. I slid a small business card across the table. It's for a modest 2-bedroom unit in a quiet part of North Phoenix. It's clean, safe, and exactly the kind of middle-class life you once told me was settling. You have 48 hours to vacate the mansion. I own this one too, I said. It's exactly the kind of place you always told me I belonged in. The rent is at market value, and I expect it to be paid on the first of every month. No exceptions. This was the cold reality of the power illusion of an empty wallet. For years, they believed they were the elite because they held a stack of bills that didn't belong to them. They mistook debt for status and theft for talent. But status without character is just a costume. The moment I stopped funding their performance, the entire stage collapsed. The FBI's white-collar crime division has already been notified. Adam. Marcus is handing over the flash drive with the full forensic audit to the federal prosecutors as we speak. They don't take kindly to money laundering. My brother started to wail a high-pitched, pathetic sound. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt the same peace an accountant feels when the ledger is finally balanced, and the truth is, the only thing left on the page. Goodbye, Adam, I said. I'm sure you'll find plenty of business-minded people to talk to in federal prison. The legal storm that followed that afternoon in the conference room was as absolute as a desert flash flood. My brother, Adam, was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for multiple counts of felony, money laundering, and grand theft. The charismatic mask he had worn for 32 years didn't just slip. It was stripped away by a judge who had no interest in his excuses about pressure or high-stakes business. As part of his plea deal, he was ordered to pay $15,500,000 in restitution, a sum that will take him decades to fulfill. His career in real estate is permanently over, and his reputation is reduced to a cautionary tale in industry newsletters. My parents, Gary and Kimberly, moved into that modest unit in North Phoenix 48 hours after the meeting. Every month on the 1st, I receive an automated notification that their rent has been deposited into my trust account. We speak occasionally, but the conversations are brief and brittle, filled with the heavy, unspoken weight of their late-coming regret. They spend their days in a space where they can hear their neighbors' televisions through the walls, a constant reminder of the daughter they dismissed and the son they subsidized into a criminal life. My father finally sent me a letter admitting he had failed me, that he was in awe of the strength I had shown while he was busy looking the other way. I keep that letter in my desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the truth eventually demands to be seen, even by those who choose to be blind. I used the first installment of Adam's restitution money to establish the John Caldwell Center for Real Estate Integrity. It's a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships for students who, like me, understand that real estate isn't just about making money. It's about stewardship, ethics, and building a foundation that can actually hold weight. I left my job at the Department of Housing and Urban Development to manage the Caldwell Heritage Trust full-time. The $585 million empire has grown since I took the lead, and for the first time in my life, I don't feel the need to hide what I've built. Looking back on this journey, I've come to realize that some people only value you based on how useful you are to their own narrative. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that your worth is not a debate. It is not something that requires a vote from your family or your peers. I spent 29 years trying to earn love that was conditional, and it took losing my family completely to realize that I never needed their permission to be remarkable in the first place. This is a letter to those who always feel like they are standing on the edge. To the quiet ones, the bookish ones, the ones who were told they were too sensitive or not enough while a golden sibling soaked up all the light. If you feel like an invisible observer in your own life, know this: your silence is not a weakness, it is a strategic advantage. Use that time to watch, use it to learn, use it to build an empire in the dark so that when you finally step into the sun, your success is so undeniable that no amount of gaslighting can dim it. Document your worth, save your receipts, build your life on facts and integrity, because when the illusions of others finally crumble, those are the only things that will keep you standing. Forgiveness isn't always about inviting a toxic person back to your table. Sometimes it's simply about balancing the ledger and setting yourself free from the debt of their expectations. I'm at peace now, not because I won, but because I finally stopped fighting for a place at a table that was never meant for me. I built my own table, and it is stronger than anything they ever offered. If this story moved you, please share it with one person who needs to know they are enough. Don't forget to follow for more stories of justice and resilience. Your voice is your power. Use it.